Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the collection Spider-Man, Vengeance of Venom. Last year, for Spider-Man month, I covered the collection Birth of Venom, and I highly recommend you check out that episode first as it leads directly into this one. But let me give you some highlights to help you out anyway. In the 80s, Spider-Man returned from the Secret Wars with his now famous black suit, but with help from the Fantastic Four, quickly learned that the suit was a living symbiote that was attempting to permanently bond to him. When the suit tried to take control of him, he managed to get to a church and used its bell to create strong enough sound waves to kill the symbiote, as sound is one of its main weaknesses. But that turned out to not be the end of it, as this death was then retconned to instead suggest the suit simply moved into the church where it found and bonded with down-on-his-luck reporter Eddie Brock to form Venom. Venom and Spidey would fight, but Spidey was able to outwit his opponent and Venom ended up in the supervillain's prison, the Vault. But almost immediately he escaped by using his suit's appearance-changing abilities to disguise himself as a guard. He then came after Spider-Man again, nearly managing to kill our wall-crawling hero, but again was outsmarted and sent back to the Vault. Which is the precise point that this volume picks up at, so let's see what further torment Venom has planned for Peter Parker and take this away. The comic opens on some guards at the Vault finding Eddie Brock dead in his cell, having committed suicide, and that's how Venom dies. The end. Okay, obviously not really. The symbiote was able to create a fake layer over his body that hid his pulse and vital signs, and he reveals this all in the morgue, where he's able to escape due to decreased security in that area. And also by killing the medical personnel in the room, because even though he has that thing about not killing the innocent, Marvel also clearly didn't know how to have him live by that code and yet still be a cool and scary villain to 90s teens. All this isn't even part of the actual comics collected here, just some in-between moments from issues that came out between the comics collected in these two collections. As you can tell with the final of these, where Venom says buy the next issue or he'll eat your dog. Why would you eat a dog, Venom? You're an evil man. Once our stories actually start, Venom moves to his base in New York, an abandoned bomb shelter hidden deep underground, where he demonstrates his wicked plans by eating an innocent spider. That's just a taste of what you'll do to Spider-Man, you say? Just one question. Who are you talking to? Venom goes and sees Aunt May looking for Peter, but she's just learned that Brock is a bad guy and not the friend of Peter's he claimed to be in the previous volume. So she points him to Shepherd Park, claiming Peter is there on a photo assignment, in the hopes that she can send the police after him to stop him without ever involving Peter. She does let Peter know about this though, trying to warn him that his friend is dangerous and to stay away, but of course that just gets Pete showing up to the park to fight Venom. It doesn't go too well for Spidey, but their fight gets interrupted when Venom throws a taxi at Pete, which leads to a baby falling into the water and the taxi exploding. Venom saves the baby from drowning thanks to his weird obsession with the innocent, and Spidey saves the family a few moments later from the exploding taxi, because of course the taxi just explodes. But by then, the cops have made the scene, and Venom decides that don't jive with him, so he nopes out of there to continue the fight another day. So he shows up to Spider-Man at his aunt's house again, telling him about his hidden underground tunnels where they can fight without interruption. Only they end up being interrupted down there as well, this time by lame early 90s villains Sticks and Stone. Yep, that's literally what they're called. But you see, Sticks is spelled with an X, so, you know, it's cool. Dumb and Dumber here are actually just hired goons working for Jonathan Caesar, an obsessed stalker of Pete's wife MJ, who hired the pair to get Spider-Man to stop interfering with his gross plans. Stone is like an off-brand Iron Man, just all gear and tech everywhere, while Sticks is a living cancer cell that infects any living thing he touches with an incredibly fast and destructive cancer. Pleasure and release? Gross. While they're definitely C-list villains at best, their specific abilities make them actually useful against Venom. With Stone having both sonic weapons and a heat ray, although they seem to temporarily forget that heat is one of Venom's weaknesses. it's whatever. But it ends up being Styx who proves the most effective, as his touch just instantly kills the Venom symbiote, and since killing provides pleasure to Styx, killing something like the symbiote just leaves him tripping balls apparently. So Spider-Man is pretty easily able to send all three straight to jail, ending our first arc. Although, if anyone is interested, the next 6 issues after this one are all one arc called The Return of the Sinister Six, which I covered for the first Spider-Man month here on the channel. It's actually one of my favorite videos I've ever done, but also one of my least viewed, so I don't know, maybe you could, like, click up here and help a brother out? Just saying. Anyway, back to this collection, we get another interlude that sees Eddie Brock in jail with a cellmate named Cletus Cassidy. You know he's a bad guy because he listens to Motley Crue, and only bad dudes listen to metal, am I right? Right? Yeah? But the symbiote comes to break Eddie out of jail because it's still alive after all. What? No, surely not. We were all so surprised. But even though he's Shawshanked his way on out of there, it seems he's left a little piece of himself behind, and that piece drips awfully close to that serial-killing psychopath, Cletus Cassidy. Dun dun dun! Venom then goes after Spider-Man again, of course, this time employing some clever trickery. After doing some research at his old workplace, the Daily Globe, Brock tricks one of Peter's professors, as Peter is in college at this point of the timeline, into calling up Peter and telling him about a cryogenic lab. And to help him along, Venom also calls immediately after that to make sure Peter connects the dots. And connect them he does, as Peter decides he can use the cryogenic lab to freeze Venom, eliminating the threat he poses. That seems like kind of being judge, jury, and executioner there, Pete, but yeah, alright. So Peter rushes to the lab, Venom hot on his heels, to pretend it's not an obvious trap, but when Peter gets to the lab, he finds himself being the one frozen alive. He survives the process and wakes to find himself on a tropical island, which sounds like the best case scenario until you get to the point where Venom decides that he's going to take the time to hunt him down for sport, most dangerous game style. Or maybe I can make a more modern reference like, Squid Game. Yeah, let's go with that. It's just like Squid Game. There's an abandoned village on the island because there was once a mining community there, but the mines were apparently filled with explosive gas that led to some horrible disaster that apparently killed a lot of people, judging from this graveyard Spidey finds, and that's why the island was abandoned. This gives Spidey an idea though, and he sets up a trap where he gets Venom to chase him to the village at night, and then he runs off into the woods while carrying a torch. Venom throws a car at the torch instead of just chasing after Spider-Man, which seems like the more reasonable thing to do to me, but you know. And he lands a solid hit. But Spidey, or at least the torch, which is all we see of him, keeps falling a bit more than it seems like he should have because he's falling into an open pit for the mines, which of course then ignites the gas, killing Spider-Man. Spidey, I'm not sure you understand how traps work. Venom is so excited about his victory that he references Shakespeare and then decides to live out the rest of his days peacefully relaxing on the island, safe in the knowledge that he now enjoys a Spidey-free world. But actually, Spider-Man planned it all out like that and had wedged the torch into a tree and dressed a skeleton in his clothes, so Venom actually blew up an already dead body. Spidey swims out to sea while Eddie is distracted and gets picked up by a ship, letting us move forward another 20 issues. Here we immediately get introduced to a new villain, Carnage, who's all black and red, or black and blood as the narration says. We're also introduced to a new artist, Mark Bagley, who I have to say is perhaps my favorite Spider-Man artist to date. His characters are so human looking and so expressive, and he reins in the craziness of the Venom mouth to something a bit more exaggerated than we saw from Todd McFarlane in the previous volume, but drastically less exaggerated than the whatever the crap this is that Eric Larson was doing in the past several stories, and that Jim Craig does in an upcoming story that I'll get to. I feel like it was really Bagley that created the now iconic version of the character's look. Also, I think Larson and McFarlane both gave their human characters bizarre head shapes that I find honestly disturbing, and thankfully Bagley doesn't have that problem. Anyway, this Carnage character seems to be killing just because it's fun, not claiming any kind of crazy moral justification like Venom. But Spidey, not having seen the killer, hears a description and thinks Venom has returned and begun indiscriminately killing. He quickly learns otherwise though when, as he attempts to learn more about Venom in order to track him down, he starts reading about Venom's cellmate that we also just met, that Cletus Cassidy fella. Spidey tracks Cletus down to the condemned orphanage Cassidy was raised in, a place Peter suspects Cassidy himself burned down to cover up his first murder. Cassidy is there and Spider-Man quickly learns he's no match for the new symbiote, who is somehow just as strong as, if not stronger, than Venom, and can even turn his symbiote into bladed weapons that he can hurl at his enemies, though they quickly break down once detached from his body. Carnage flees the fight for no real reason, but Pete decides that the only way to stop the psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est, is to recruit help from someone who knows both the symbiote and the man inside. Yep, Eddie Brock. He's just the asshole for the job. So Human Torch and Spidey go pull Eddie out of retirement on his island so we can get the unlikely team-up of Spider-Man and Venom, on the agreement that afterwards Spider-Man lets Venom go free. Although the issue covers for this arc definitely sell the team-up as occurring in a different direction. Oh well. They're initially able to track down Carnage because the symbiotes are able to sense each other, but after Carnage flees from yet another fight for yet again no real reason, he also somehow disables whatever tracking device they used to find him the first time, which is bad news because apparently now he's going after J. Jonah Jameson. Ruh-roh. Their only clues to where Carnage may have taken Jonah are the fact that Carnage said he wants an audience in this flyer they find near a random pedestrian Carnage kills on his way to wherever he's going, advertising an event called Headbangers Heaven at Madison Square Gardens. Spider-Man realizes this must be his destination because, his words, not mine, everyone knows metalheads take pride in bucking the establishment. And that makes them all psychopathic murderers, Spidey? Does it? Sounding a little judgy there, mister. Hey, how about I criticize something you like, huh? How about I talk about how this building is apparently Madison Square Gardens, but it's neither a square nor a garden. Guess it also takes pride in bucking the establishment. I bet its real name isn't even Madison. Who's named Madison anyway? I mean, really. Where was I? Oh right, Spidey is of course correct in his bigotry and Carnage does show up to the so-called gardens to kill Jonah, but luckily the extremely dynamic duo show up in time to stop him, with Spidey using the building's PA system to create sonic pulses loud enough to hurt both symbiotes. But while it's enough to put a stop to Carnage, it isn't enough to put down Venom, and with their allegiance now ended with Carnage defeated, Venom attacks Spider-Man. Only we learn Spidey always had a backup plan in the form of the Fantastic Four, and Reed shows up to add his sonic gun, we've seen used a few times by this point, to the mix, taking down Venom. Venom says this proves his point about Spider-Man, and even Jonah takes a dig at him, saying Captain America would have kept his promise. Spider-Man argues that Cap would have never made the compromise in the first place because he's a legend and Spidey's just a man, but I don't know about that. I'm sure Cap's done some shit. We then get one of the most unique stories in the collection and our first Venom story in the collection not written by David Michelinie. Instead, it's a Peter David story, which is fitting as Peter David is the one who wrote the Sin Eater story, The Death of Jean DeWolf, that is so integral to Venom's origins. In this story, we find Eddie again in the vault, with his symbiote having apparently committed suicide in order to get away from him. Free from its influence, Eddie asks for a new trial, claiming to have nothing but regret for the actions he committed under the alien influence. Spider-Man doesn't trust him though, but Daredevil himself, Matt Murdock, shows up to represent Eddie, and his extrasensory perceptions tell him that Eddie's not lying. But just before Eddie gets granted his freedom, Spider-Man decides to push him, and Brock gets so angry he punches Spidey, revealing that the symbiote is still alive and was just really disgustingly hiding inside of Eddie. But I mean, are you really surprised, Spidey? Really, from the moment Eddie said he didn't love his Teddy, you knew he was a no-good kid. After a drawn-out fight outside the prison, Spidey and DD managed to trick Venom back into a cell thanks to a holographic simulator the prison uses as a reward for good behavior that they introduced to us at the beginning of the story. Because we obviously had to get a lady in a bikini on a beach in here somehow, even in a story set entirely in a prison. obviously. The very next story, though, sees Venom being kept in a holding cell in a building in New York before being transferred to another prison, because I guess notes weren't shared between writers here. Despite painful sonics being used to hold him in place, Venom forces his way out because he sees something that greatly upsets him on one of the guards' newspapers. And that thing he saw is that Peter Parker's parents have returned miraculously to life. Yeah, so in the 5th ever Spider-Man annual, Peter learned his parents were spies that had betrayed their country to the Red Skull. Although digging a little deeper, he learned that they were actually double agents, or triple agents, that were going to betray Red Skull right back, but never got the chance because they died in a plane crash. More recently, at least in terms of these comics, it was revealed that it wasn't really Red Skull, it was some communist pretending to be the Red Skull that his parents had actually dealt with. Remember, the Cold War was still on when these comics came out. Even more recently, just a few issues before this, Peter's parents showed up out of nowhere claiming to have actually spent the last 20 years in an internment camp in Russia, with their deaths having been faked. But finally, after a regime change, or really one can assume after the fall of communism, they were released and let back into America. And there's a lot more story there, but I'm not going to get into it all here. Hopefully I'll be able to at some point in the future, but for now, let's get back to Venom, who shows up in front of MJ, May, and the two elder Parkers, but leaves them when Spidey swings by to have a fight with him that Venom quickly wins. Instead of killing Peter, though, he actually leaves so he can go kidnap Pete's mom and dad. While Pete, and most likely the reader, probably assume Venom wants to kill them for spawning the man he hates so much, it actually is a lot more complicated than that. It seems Venom actually considers Parker's parents to be innocents that he wants to keep from being corrupted by being around their nuisance of a son. Desperate to find his parents and gain some kind of edge, Peter goes to see a woman named Anne Wayne, a lawyer and, as it turns out, Venom's ex-wife. There's also a really subtle joke here I just have to point out, as Anne seems to be citing a case here, Brown versus Quayle. But actually, this is a reference to a time the then Vice President Dan Quayle made a speech where he essentially blamed much of society's ills on the fictional TV character Murphy Brown, and the fact that she was a single mother. Because how dare a woman be successful and a mother? And the media had an absolute field day with it. It's a true story, look it up. Anne mentions an amusement park that Eddie used to take her to all the time, and Spider-Man heads there hoping that's where Eddie took his parents, and quickly learns that he was right. But once again, their confrontation gets interrupted, both by Annie showing up wanting to talk to Eddie, and by the Wild Pack, a group of mercenaries that work for sort of super villain anti-hero Silver Sable, and were hired by J. Jonah Jameson to bring Venom in for a news story. Cause that guy be crazy. Both Spidey and Venom deal with the Wild Pack while Spidey's parents mostly free themselves, and then Venom quickly defeats Spider-Man by bashing his head against the support frame for the Ferris wheel. But he's saved suddenly by the last remaining Wild Pack member showing up to blast Venom with a sonic gun, intent on killing the monster, only to have him be saved suddenly by Anne knocking the guy out. As thanks, Venom plans to get straight back to killing Spider-Man, but the Ferris wheel starts to collapse, and like many a helpless woman in horror movies, Anne just kinda stands there waiting to be killed. Eddie tries to save her, but his symbiote is still too weak from the sonic blast to hold the wheel up. But thankfully, Spider-Man wakes up, and immediately realizing the danger, he helps Eddie, and together they're able to toss the entire giant structure away from anyone. Venom still plans to get straight back to killing Spidey, but Anne intervenes, pointing out that Spider-Man just did what Eddie is always saying he wants to do and protected an innocent life. Eddie realizes that if he kills Spider-Man, all the future innocent lives he would have one day saved would then be lost, and that would be Venom's fault. So he decides to make a deal with Spider-Man where they each agree not to go after the other, and somewhat reluctantly, Spider-Man agrees. Venom then swings off to go star in his own title that I'm sure I'll look at some point in the future, but we'll move on to the final story collected here, which is a flashback to Eddie's first few days as Venom as he goes through several trials and situations that allow him to start learning about all the various powers he now has, and and his weaknesses. After first merging with his other in that church, he returned home, where we learn that one of his neighbors, this friendly old man, is a brilliant inventor. But the inventor's son is tired of living in poverty and wants them to make money on his inventions by selling them to some greedy corporate suit named Markham. The old man refuses, but Markham's men come calling and kill the old man, kidnap the son, and steal the plans for his latest invention. So Venom, who likes the old man, agrees to go rescue the son and seek revenge, but soon learns the son intentionally betrayed his dad for the money, though he never intended for the old man to die. Markham burns up the stolen plans to eliminate any links to the old man, ensuring he won't go to jail. So to find justice, Eddie straight up tosses the man into a barrel of molten metal. It's pretty effed up, especially the way Venom enjoys it. Yikes. Deciding he can use his powers to get whatever he wants, Eddie goes to an old homeless vet he once interviewed while he was still a reporter in order to learn some military tactics, which we then see him use on Peter in some callbacks to some of his first few mysterious appearances leading up to Venom's first actual appearance. But when the old vet uses some money Eddie gave him in thanks to overdose on drugs, Eddie doubles down on his blaming others for the corruption of innocence, and it only increases his desire to kill Spider-Man. And while that marks the real beginning, for us it finally marks the end, so let's get to the breakdown. I said in my Birth of Venom review that it was easy to see what made Venom a popular character, that it was largely the ways he's so similar and yet so different from Spider-Man, and that holds largely true here as well. Especially as the plots lean ever more and more into the idea of Venom not being a villain, but instead some sort of unstable anti-hero. In that sense, Carnage was essentially inevitable. He's the other end of the spectrum from Spider-Man, with Venom right in the middle. Carnage is the villain Venom could never be because Marvel was worried it would hurt his popularity, while Spidey's the hero Venom can never be because Marvel wanted him to be a villain. You can visibly see Michelinie's struggle with that balance in this collection, trying to show Venom both as a hero and villain by hanging onto a thread of a ludicrous, nonsensical moral justification that he clearly didn't really understand. Which I guess isn't that surprising coming from the guy who literally equated all metal fans with serial killers. Talk about your Brown versus Quail moments. I think it could have worked to an extent though, if Venom hadn't proven to be such a monumentally popular character that they were throwing him back into the story more and more frequently, no matter what they did to end it. So yes, I think Venom as a character ended up suffering on the whole from his own popularity among fans. And I think it's difficult to read through this collection and not really feel that. You can also see it in the progression of tone of trying to make the stories darker and darker, like how Peter doesn't quip when fighting Venom. Most of the time, he barely even talks and simply narrates his actions and concerns in thought bubbles. Or how Peter's social life connections receive drastically less focus in these stories. There's a moment where Mary Jane is confessing something deeply important about herself to him, about why she started smoking again, and Pete's just like, "Shut up, babe, I'm watching the news." Jesus, Pete, no wonder you two eventually broke up. It was just an awkward mess of trying to appeal to what they thought to be a more jaded young audience and yet still keep the classic feel of Spider-Man comics. Still, all that considered, I think they did about as good of a job with that as they possibly could, and the stories are still interesting and fun to read, so I am giving this series a recommendation level of high. If you're at all a Venom fan or just curious about the character, these early Venom stories will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. The collected edition gets one Venom logo, which, as I said, basically goes right in the middle. There's very few bonuses, pretty much just a few bonus and alternate covers, and a short Venom story that is also in the Birth of Venom collection for some reason. But with this many issues collected in one volume, how many bonuses do you really need? Thank you everybody for watching. I wanted to get this video out more in time with the second Venom movie coming out, but you know, things happen. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to comment and click the like and subscribe button so that you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.